Thank you. Okay, so we're going to follow through these slides. So if you want to open them and take a look at them as we go, that'd be great. Today we're going to talk about building community resilience in a changing climate. The second slide just tells some information about me. I wear several different hats right now. I am spending a portion of my time, I work as a lawyer and consultant working primarily with nonprofits through Charitable Allies and Allies for Good. I'm also in an American Studies PhD program where I'm actually studying sustainable development, particularly how we accelerate it using or through partnerships and cross kind of collaborative efforts, and have become really involved with a project that some of you may be familiar with. It's the Rethink 6570 Coalition, and that is that's an organization that is newly forming, moving from a grassroots organization to an official nonprofit that's going to be working on rethinking how we rebuild the inner loop in downtown Indianapolis, thinking specifically about the sustainability of that rebuild, which will happen sometime in the next 10 years because the highway is wearing out, and like the north split that is actually under construction now, the rest of it will have to be rebuilt. And so Rethink itself is going to be looking at how we can rebuild it in a way that that gives us more green space, that gives us more trees, and deals with a lot of things we need to be thinking about when it comes to sustainable development. So right first, I just want to start, if you go to slide 5, we're going to start just talking about climate change in particular. And I think it's important to note that the 6 hottest years on record since 1880 are 2015, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2016. These are actually in reverse order in terms of the hottest, and 2020 was the hottest. So you can see a trend that shouldn't be surprising, but that is something to be paying attention to. And I know there's a lot of people who are now really paying attention to it, particularly at the federal level and the international level. And you're all pretty familiar. I'm sure you've heard about a lot of that work. We're going to talk a little bit about what causes climate change. And slide 6 is a really interesting, diagram or chart that shows CO2 emissions, and they're accelerating the increase of CO2, actually carbon parts per million, in the atmosphere. This is from the Mauna Loa Observatory, where it's down in Hawaii. It's where they have been studying and following the levels of CO2 in the atmosphere, and they've been charting it for many, many, many years. And the chart itself is just a really powerful visual of what's happening in our atmosphere. And so we get into, and I'm not a scientist, in fact, so please don't think that I am. So let's just basically talk about the greenhouse effect and what happens. Many of you probably are already very familiar with it. Some of you may not be. So I think it's just a level set. It's kind of good to know what's going on. So we have the sun, it's coming to the Earth's surface, and it's penetrating the atmosphere. And then on slide 9, you see that some of this energy is reflected back into space. What happens, however, is that some of it is absorbed and it's re-radiated as heat. That's slide 10. And then when you get to slide 11, you see that most of the heat is absorbed by greenhouse gases and reflected in all sorts of directions, warming the Earth. Some of that we need, too much of it we don't. And that's the problem, is right now we've got too much greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and it's overwarming the surface of the Earth. And the scientists attribute the global warming trend observed since the mid 20th century, and it's human expansion of greenhouse gases and the greenhouse effect itself, and it is, everyone sort of understands that this is human induced. You'll hear people talk about it not being, but as a little bit later, we'll talk about 97% of the world's scientists who study this area are in agreement that we are making this happen. So the gases that contribute to this greenhouse gas or this greenhouse effect, it's water vapor, nitrous oxide, carbon dioxide, which is the thing we really measure, and then methane. And on slides 14 and 15, I give you some of the background on those different types of those different gases, including water vapor. The one that people want to ask about a lot is methane, and that we know that comes from, there's a variety of sources, but that's methane comes from cows, and are cows bad? And all, you start to get some of those kind of questions. No, they're not. And, but it is, methane is a more powerful greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. And it's something that we have to pay attention to. So on slide 16, we have just a picture of, before I really started studying this, I didn't really understand this whole concept of, what happens when where is the carbon and how does it get out into the atmosphere? So it's buried, it's buried material that has been in the ground for thousands of years. And then there's also carbon that's on the surface. And what happens is when we start burning things, like we start burning coal, which has been underground for a long time, we release that carbon. And that is what the greenhouse gases, that's the carbon that goes into the greenhouse gases and contributes to all this warming. So, how long have we known about this? I think that's a really interesting question. We've known about it for a long time. Slide 17 talks about it was in the 1880s when the first scientist quantified the contribution of carbon dioxide to the greenhouse gas effect and speculated about whether variations in atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide would contribute to long-term variations in climate. And then in the 1900s, Thomas Crowder Chamberlain was a geologist and an educator, and he concluded that carbon dioxide must have played a part in climate changing, and probably would in the future. So this is going back a long time ago, and we knew that it was possible, and we didn't really realize how much carbon we would be able to release into the atmosphere. So on slides 18, we have the scientific consensus. 97% of climate scientists agree that climate warming trends over the past century are extremely likely due to the human activities. And most leading scientific organizations worldwide have issued public statements endorsing that position. So there's a lot of talk out there about whether climate change is real, and whether, in certain pockets, people deny it. And so then you really have to assess sort of where's your sources of information, and I'm going to believe the scientists in this one. So the research program that I'm part of, this is on slide 20, is with the IUPUI American Studies Department, and it's applied PhD for professionals, helping us think about how you solve really complex public problems. The sponsor of my research is Health and Hospital Corporation of Marion County, and that encompasses Eskenazi Health and the Marion County Public Health Department. My focus is on how do we accelerate sustainable development as a matter of health and equity. And so you might ask yourself, well, that's interesting that Health and Hospital Corporation would be funding somebody to study climate change or sustainable development. And so you might think, well, why is that the case? So for some of you may not be asking that. You're like, no, we know it's a health issue, but it's an important question to ask. So why would a hospital system would they want to study this? So this is pre-COVID, but on slide 22, we see that the Lancet Commission's report on health and climate, which is a really respected commission, they have said that that climate change, and again, this was before COVID, and I don't think this has changed because of COVID, but that climate change is predicted to be the biggest healthcare crisis of the 21st century. And according to experts in healthcare and the environment, it's going to strain our healthcare system and have a disproportionate impact on the poor. And as the pace of climate change accelerates, large institutions like a health or hospital system and municipalities have a critical role to play in leading efforts to address climate change. And for health institutions like HHC, the role is doubly important given that healthcare facilities both contribute quite a bit to climate change and have to deal directly with the negative health consequences that come from climate change. So let's talk a little bit about the health implications in Indiana to climate change. And I want to do this because it's important for all of you who are thinking about your communities, whether it's your neighborhood or more broadly. Once you start to understand what the health implications are, then you can start to think about, well, how are we going to build more resilience into our neighborhoods and our communities more generally? And a great resource, it's in the slides on 24, slide 24 is the Purdue Indiana Climate Change Impacts Assessment. It's a great place to go to learn about all the things that, that we expect will happen in Indiana. And it gives you a sense of what gives you a chance to know so you can prepare. And that's the most important thing I think at this stage. And that Purdue Climate Change Impacts Assessment, they go through agriculture, they look at aquatic ecosystems, they look at climate, they look at energy, forest ecosystems, health, tourism, urban green space reports, water, and infrastructure. So they're really looking at a variety of things and studying those things to see what can we expect in 2050 and beyond. So the first thing that I think is important for us all to think about with climate change is air quality. So higher temperatures and stagnant air will increase ground level ozone production, and that's going to worsen our air quality. And the reduced air quality can trigger asthma attacks and heart attacks and cause or worsen respiratory or cardiovascular illnesses. And that's so things like COPD, emphysema, high blood pressure, diabetes. These are things that lead to premature deaths. And with the air quality deteriorating, we need to be really cognizant of this. So in your neighborhoods and in your communities, thinking about, well, who are those people who are at risk, and how can we, what can we be doing to help them prepare? Another thing to be concerned about, a little bit less in Indianapolis than maybe some other places, is that there's just, well, no, actually I take that back. In Indianapolis and other large cities, there is the risk of extreme heat because we are expected to have a lot more really hot days. And that is likely to cause more injuries and death. We think that the extreme cold days we have will go down, but we'll have more hot days, and the balance of that offset that will actually have more injuries and death due to temperature extremes. So we won't have people cold, particularly homeless people who are out in the weather, but people will be really hot. The other thing that's unfortunate for any of us who have allergies is that Indiana's allergy season is projected to lengthen by about a month by mid-century. And this will be due to a longer growing season. And ragweed and other plants will produce more pollen as rising carbon dioxide in the air increases their growth. And so on slide 28, you can see that Indiana's frost-free season, in which the temperature continuously stays above 32 degrees Fahrenheit, has lengthened by an average of 9 days beyond what it was in 1915. And 8 of those have come in the spring and 1 in the fall. And under a high emissions scenario, that's where we really are not paring back in how much carbon we're continuing to put in the atmosphere. The Indiana's growing season would be projected to lengthen by 35 days, and that's in the that's in the high scenario. If it's a middle scenario, it would be 33 days, and in a low scenario of carbon dioxide in the air, that would be 30 days. So, and then it depends then if you're on the north or in your central, in our case, in central Indiana and in the south. So a lot depends on what we do in this next 10 years as to what the impact is on the length of our growing season. In some cases, the growing season longer will be good. We can produce more food. Unfortunately, it also is good for things like for plant growth that we don't really want. Some plants like ragweed and poison ivy actually thrive in high concentrations of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, so they'll actually become a little bit more potent. But that's important to know for our communities, because paying attention to where our kids are playing and whether they're getting close to poison ivy is something we're just going to have to just be more sort of diligent about. The next thing that can happen, and I know this is going to sound really like this is not like an exciting, oh yes, we're going to, right now we're going in a direction we don't want to go. We're trying to figure out ways to correct for going in that direction, but there is hope. So even though I'm listing off a bunch of health things that are happening, please don't just assume that that it's all gloom and doom, because it's not. There are things that we can be doing as a society that can change our future if we're willing to do to really make a commitment. So kind of going back to some of those health issues, we have tick-borne illnesses. Ticks have expanded their range. I think many people have probably already heard about this, and the reproduction rates across Indiana as temperatures have warmed in recent decades, that has increased. So as a result, the number of tick-borne illnesses such as Lyme disease has increased. And this trend will continue to intensify as the warming continues. Same thing with mosquito-borne illnesses, unfortunately, those pesky mosquitoes. In the past 30 years, increased precipitation and flooding may have contributed to an increase in Indiana's mosquito population. And we're going to have more significant rainfall in the spring and warmer temperatures in the spring in particular. And that just is sort of wonderful space for mosquitoes. So what does this look like on the ground in terms of we need to be more cognizant of where we have open water, and not necessarily ponds and that kind of thing, but just, pools of water in standing places where mosquitoes really like to lay eggs. So we may have to be, from a health standpoint, much more diligent about not having standing water and puddles and that kind of thing to protect against mosquito-borne illnesses. On slide 32, you can see there's a chart that looks at the mosquitoes in Indianapolis, and as you can see, the line is going up, unfortunately. The next thing we want to think about, and this is actually something important for every community to do, is to really know where your floodplains are, because we will have increased precipitation, especially in the winter and in the spring. And that's going to heighten flood risks. So flood maps are being redesigned, and you'll want to pay attention to where there are flood risks, and really just be cognizant of issues. So on slide 34, we have these projected changes in Indiana's precipitation, and I think it's really interesting to look at fall. If we think fall has been really pretty in Indiana in the last few years, that's likely to continue. The springs are what is going to be more wet than what we've had in the past, and I think we've kind of already started to see it. The springs, at least in the last few years, have been pretty wet and not the beautiful springs that we used to have. And then the falls, like there's these extended periods of just beautiful weather. The falls are predicted to continue to be drier, springs predicted to continue being wetter, and overall we'll have more precipitation, but it'll come in like concentrated amounts and not sort of, what farmers love is the gentle rains that just don't wash things away. We're going to have more of kind of those dramatic storms, and that contributes to flooding. The other things we need to think about, there's harmful algae we want to pay attention to. There's, with increased rain and higher temperatures, we can have algae blooms that happen in ponds and lakes, and so that may become more common. The other thing is that particularly for an urban area is the urban heat island effects. So cities like Indianapolis will be particularly vulnerable to the health risks of escalating heat, because cities create these, they call them urban heat islands. And if you can see slide 38, that has a map, I guess it's kind of a diagram that shows what happens when you're in a downtown area and that area doesn't have a lot of trees and doesn't have a lot of green cover. That downtown area gets really hot, hotter than the commercial districts that are a little bit further outside, or urban residential that might be further outside the really tall buildings. And then you know, kind of as you move away from the urban center, you get into suburban and then more rural areas. Those areas will be cooler, even though it's the same kind of weather in the area. The city itself actually gets a lot hotter, and so that's why we have to really pay attention to what's happening to the temperature and in vulnerable populations within the urban centers, because it can be hot for several days and not cool off at night. And that starts to create a real, that's not a recipe for success if you don't have access to air conditioning, or you don't have, air conditioning is a big thing. So that's something else we want to pay attention to. Then there's the whole thing about ozone. I know we have the no zone days in Indianapolis, and don't drive your car as much or run your lawnmower and all those things to help with the bad ozone. That is the ozone that's living close to the surface of, or that stays close to the surface of the Earth. We need ozone. It's good when it's up in the atmosphere, but when it's down close to the Earth, that's where it's a problem for us. Ozone and the bad ozone, those are likely to increase as well. And then some other health effects is there's risks of anxiety and depression and stress that comes from extreme climate events, as well as extended periods of heat. We're already seeing with COVID the impact of the anxiety and stress that COVID has brought about, and we need to be cognizant in our communities of similar kinds of things that can happen with the extreme weather. I know if you're like me, sometimes when it snows a lot and you're kind of stuck inside and you can't do anything and you can't get out, that it can be stressful. And in this case, the weather, we'll have kind of more of these weather extremes. And then, so that's probably plenty on the health impacts, but hopefully that gives you an idea of why Health and Hospital Corporation was interested in having somebody look at this more carefully. So the question then is, what can we do? And we can do things. That's what's great about this, is that this is not something where we just throw in the towel and say it's over. It's not. We can do things, but it's going to take everybody stepping in and saying, I'm going to contribute and be a part of, I'm going to be a part of the solution. So what does that look like? What does being a part of the solution look like? So slide 43 has some suggestions. So first of all, mitigating our contribution to climate change by just becoming more sustainable. Now, this is not something just one person can do. It's going to take all of us to do this, but we can do it. And we're making some progress when it comes to energy and transportation and our built environment. There's a lot more in our food production. There's a lot more that we need to do. I see. I just see somebody chat. Brenda, you mentioned revised flood maps. Where can we find them? I'll have to get that for you. I don't know where the maps are right now or if they've been published yet. But I can get that information for you. Thanks, Leslie. So what can we do so we can mitigate? Another thing is we can do what we're sort of talking about, or going to start talking about here a little bit, is just adapting. So how can we anticipate the effects and develop strategies for adapting? Then how can we partner? as I said, no one of us are going to be able to solve this challenge. This is a global challenge, but it has local impacts, and we have to do things at the local level to then participate in what happens in the global. So partnering with institutions and encouraging and supporting the adoption of greater sustainability practices is really important. One thing you can do is to encourage your employer to take this seriously, encourage people who you work with, and just talk about this as something that we need to pay attention to. So much of our focus has been on COVID, and that is where it should be. But we don't have a whole lot of time to actually turn things around. And so anyone you can talk to, talk with your employer, talk with your friends, there's things that you can do. The other thing is to advocate and to support those who are advocating for climate action. And there's a lot of great people who are doing a lot of great work. I took a class a couple years ago with Janet McCabe, who's now #2 at the EPA, and that is an amazing. That's amazing for our country. It's amazing for Indiana. That's somebody from our state is #2 at the EPA, and what she told us, and this was during the administration that was really didn't pay attention or didn't want to pay attention to climate change. Regardless of your politics, that just was the policy position at the time when I was taking this class. And I remember Janet saying, there are all these people working on this, and right now they're there, and they've been toiling away. And when we start to make this a community and a state and a national conversation, they're there, and they've been working, and they've done, and they're gonna come out. So I think we're actually starting to see that, and it's exciting because there's some really, really smart people who've spent their lives thinking about this. And so it gives me a lot of hope to know that those people have been working so hard. It's always disheartening when you know that they have been silenced in some cases, and scientists have been vilified in some ways. But they're still working, and they feel very passionate about the future of the future of our world. So on slide 44, I just kind of remind everybody, this is going to take time, but we don't have a lot of time. And so I hope everybody takes that as just really a statement of urgency, that it's easy. I think it's easy. For some of us, it's easy to just sort of, yeah, okay. I'm too caught up in my day-to-day stuff to really think about what's 10 years out. But we have to start doing it. And so I've put in the PowerPoint, and we're not going to watch it because it's a little bit, it's about 5 minutes long, but it's called Transitioning a Town to Clean Energy. And I really recommend that you watch this video. If you have kids at home, or get your family around and just watch this video. It's just fun, but it also is very informative about some of the challenges that it would take to turn a neighborhood or a community or a city into a clean energy town. And it goes through a process and it's got all these little, it's like Peyton Manning's commercial that he had, where he had like this whole town laid out. I don't know if anybody has seen that commercial, but they take a town like that, and then they move pieces around, and they put in clean energy technology, and they show everything that has to happen in order to transition a town to clean energy. And it helps, I think, to put all of this in perspective, that yes, it is going to take some time. We need to have a sense of urgency, but it can't happen overnight. Because I know a lot of times you think, gosh, why can't we just make this transition now? Why do we have to wait? But there's a lot of things that have to happen in order to move to clean energy. So the other site that I really want to recommend to you it's on slide 45, and it's Know Your Neighborhood's Risks. And this is put out by the Hoosier Resilience It's the Hoosier Resilience Index. It's put out by the Environmental Resilience Institute. And this is a great source for, you can type in Indianapolis and you can see what's going to be happening. You can see what extreme heat is going to look like in our area, as opposed to even just central Indiana. So the Purdue Climate Impact Assessments tend to be, the state, and then they'll divide things up into northern and central and southern. The resilience index gets really kind of goes much more down to the community level. So you can look at things like, what's the climate exposure for your community? You can look at, how many extreme heat days are we going to have? You can look at what the precipitation is going to look like. And so it's just a really wonderful resource. And in case people don't have the slides up, is everybody looking at the slides, or do I need to put it in the chat, the website for this? Okay, I don't see anyone responding, but I can if folks don't see it. So right now we're going to see if we can watch, and then the next thing we can do is to support citywide efforts. And for Indianapolis, thank goodness, we have a great plan. The Office of Sustainability has worked really hard, and they have created a citywide Thrive Indianapolis plan that has a lot of really just great ideas and great plans for moving forward. And so I see somebody saying, yep, I need the slide. So let's see if I can do this here. Hang on a second. Okay, so this is this first link I'm going to put in. That's the how to transition a town to clean energy. And then this next one I'm going to put in is the Hoosier Resilience Index. And okay, so there's one. That's the index. And then let me give you the Purdue one also, in case you don't have that. So let me go back here. And that one is right here. So those are three the ERI and the Purdue ones. Those are the ones that have the resources. The other one's just an interesting video that I recommend. Okay, so let's see if we can watch this video. How many people, actually, let's just put in the chat, how many people know about the Thrive Indy plan? All right, I'm seeing, oh, good. Easy, okay. There's Leslie and Emily and Adrian and Taylor, fantastic. This is something you can do. You can tell everybody about the plan and say, get involved in this. So here is, I'm going to put the links to the video, and then we're going to see if we can get that technology to work in terms of actually watching the video, because it's worth it. And the video itself is really neat. Okay, so there's the links, and let's see if I can figure out how to share this video. Okay, Ari, I'm going to see if you can come back and help with this if you see it. Ari's behind the scenes, making things work. So,
don't give me that much credit, Brenda. Thank you, though.
Thanks all of you for bearing with me without the slides. I'm not sure why we couldn't share those, but so Ari, do you think you can show that Thrive Indianapolis video?
Let me see 1 second.
Okay.
I said I can try. I don't know if you heard all that. Let me see.
Thanks, Taylor. Thanks for being kind. But no worries. All right, I think we're gonna see it.
The Vimeo screen? Oh, you're seeing it. Okay, awesome. All right, let me press play. Let's see. Hopefully you can hear
Okay.
it. Can you hear it?
Nope.
You can't hear it? Okay. I can't. I could. Let me see. Sorry.
It's okay. You know, the other way we can do it, I can try through the share video. You want me to do that?
Yeah, let me unshare. Sorry. Okay, I think it stopped sharing.
Okay.
Okay.
Can you hear it? Yes. All right. Well, I think, okay, am I back on? Can everybody hear me now still? I'm going to keep talking. Hopefully you can hear me. Hopefully what you got from that video is that the Thrive Plan itself recognizes that making change in our city is actually going to take it's a system-wide perspective. So you saw some things in there, you're like, well, that doesn't look like it has to do with climate change or sustainable development per se. But in fact, sustainable development is a holistic picture. And you can't just do one part, you kind of have to look at it all as a system. And that's what I think is so great about the Thrive Plan, is that it really does focus on that whole system. So it's economics, it involves jobs, it involves transportation, it involves housing, it involves energy, all kinds of things. So if you get a chance, please go to the link that I put in there, which is the Thrive Indianapolis website itself. You can read the whole plan. You can just peruse the website. It's great. And there's lots of ways for people to get involved. So there's no shortage of volunteer opportunities and things. So I really, really recommend checking that out. So I think what I'd like to close with before we just entered into some questions is just, we have a decade to get this right. Once we get past that, it's going to be really, really hard to make some shifts that need to happen. So the more that you can become active in this space, and the more you can talk about it, and the more you can encourage people to do the things that are going to be hard, the better. So with that, I'm going to just open it up. We have about 10 minutes. If you want to just ask some questions, happy to try and answer them. Or if I can't answer them, like I can't tell you where the floodplain maps, the new ones are, I can get that information for you. And I'll just go ahead and put things in the chat if you want.
A question here from Leslie. How does your project align with Thrive?
Yeah, so what my project is actually going to end up being about is, I think it's going to be the 6570 rebuild. And I don't know if you noticed in the video, they talk about infrastructure, that the rebuild of the highway and the proposal that is going to be kind of put out there is going to talk about how that can be rebuilt. That big piece of infrastructure, which drives so much else happening in Indianapolis, can be rebuilt better in a way that reconnects streets that had been kind of sliced by an elevated highway. And actually, what the proposal will be is to recess it. And that creates all kinds of opportunities for parkways, for green spaces, for trees, and that's all infrastructure related. It also impacts social inclusion, and that's actually part of the Thrive plan as well, is how do we create, how do we encourage more equity? If you know about how the highways were built in the first place, they were built through redlined areas that really, really damaged communities, particularly communities of Black and Brown people, and it's not a great part of our history, and so we can rebuild that highway in a way that can help to. It can never repair what was done in the past, but it can go some way towards reconnecting communities that were torn apart. So that's where it connects with the Thrive plan. And yeah, when you start to hear more things about Rethink, please tell folks and be supportive, because that what can happen with that highway can drive a lot of really great things in Indianapolis that will have an effect and will kind of a ripple out effect on so many other things happening in the city. So thanks for that question. Do you have any others?
Taylor said, I admit this is a really specific question, but are you aware of IPL's progress, if any, on divesting from fossil fuels and transitioning to renewable energy sources?
Yeah, I think they are making progress. I am not up to date on all of the things that they're doing, but they are making progress. Encouragement to make more progress is always something we want to consider. And just paying attention. If you're, there's a bunch of different ways you can kind of connect into all of this. And if you pick one, I have some friends that are very interested in food and food security. So they're focused on that. If you're interested in energy, I would recommend really starting to follow what's happening. And there are folks who are working on that you can then connect with. So I know they're making progress. I know they have programs for communities that can help in making your community and your home more efficient. And that goes a long way towards, our built environment contributes quite a bit to climate change, and we need all of our buildings, existing buildings and new ones, to become much more efficient. IPL has programs that can help people do that within their homes. So you want to encourage people to take advantage of those. All right. Any other questions? So what are you all? Oh, here we go. So there's the question is, Emily, thanks for asking this. Thank you for all the organizations and resources you've shared. You're welcome. And are there ways to get involved that you'd recommend? I would, there are, like the Hoosier Environmental Council is doing a lot of work in this area. The Office of Sustainability for the city. If you know Mo McReynolds, I'm sure Mo doesn't want everyone emailing her, but she's with the Office of Sustainability, and they have a lot of things that they're trying to do. And so I know that they would need help. There's reconnecting our waterways. There's just a whole host of environmental organizations and sustainability organizations that are working in this space. And so I'm trying to think if I've told some folks in the past, like we need a website that has all of these groups listed so that it's easy to get involved. I don't think that exists, but like if you go to the Environmental Resilience Institute and you look at some of their partners, you can see the organizations that are involved. I would just learn what you can about those organizations. And my experience has been they're really open to people calling and saying, I want to get involved. What can I do? The Hoosier Environmental Council has, they have a program where you can be like, I don't know if it's called an ambassador, but you can play a role as a volunteer with the organization. Another resource for Emily is Indiana Forest Alliance. Yep, that's right. And they have an Indy-specific program focused on protecting Indy's existing old-growth forests. Yeah, thanks, Taylor, for sharing that. That's another great group. What are some other things people are involved in that are listening into this? So it sounds like Taylor is familiar with Indiana Forest Alliance. Anything else? Bicycling infrastructure, yep. Yeah. Well, Leslie, yes. I wish all of our leaders would be more urgent about this. I don't know if you can all see her question and answer, but knows the mayor's understands this, wish the governor and the state legislators would move on this. And that, you know what? All of us that are on the grassroots level, we have a voice. And we need to use it. This is a time to use your social networks and all of that to speak up, because as long as we're trying, we can make a difference. And so use your voice. I would definitely say that. So we're going to close in 2 minutes, and it's been great. And I apologize that the PowerPoint didn't work, but it is in the link, and so hopefully you can access that. There's some other links that are in there that you can go to. And yes, Connie, at the federal level, there is positive movement. There is definitely positive movement. And so the biggest thing is, I will leave you, is don't give up hope, because when you give up hope, that's when we've lost. And we can make a difference. So thanks everyone for joining in. And I hope that you have a great rest of your evening. All right, and I am gonna sign off.